Hello, welcome to episode 4 of a Confessions of a Yarn Addict podcast. My name is Anniken Allis and I'm a Norwegian knitting and living in Cornwall in the UK, southwest of England. Today I'm going to show you what's on my needles. There hasn't been an awful lot of change in that, so I'm kind of feeling like it's a little bit boring. I've nearly finished something and I was hoping to have it finished before I recorded, but I haven't. I'm probably about an hour away from finishing it, but I got the house myself, so I thought I'd better record while I got the chance. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about elitism in knitting, and how to knit on a budget. So we'll get into that as well. But first, I want to tell you about something that's happening in my online knitting group at the moment. So my online knitting group is the Love of Lace Knitting Facebook group. We're having a knit along this month and next month, so September and August and September, and we're knitting this shawl which is called Valletta. Let me just put it on. There is a separate video on this shawl where I talk about it. That's how I would probably wear it most of the winter, but it's quite a big shawl. I have a blog post where I talk about how you can make it smaller, so you can also just kind of throw it around like that. So it's quite a nice shawl. Well, it's a very nice shawl. I like it. It's my design, so of course I like it. I always feel weird saying, I love this shawl. Well, I designed it, so I'm not going to design something I don't like. It's quite a big shawl, but I do have a blog post on how you can make it smaller. There is a video on my YouTube channel, probably about 3 videos back, so you should find it fairly easily, where I show how I would wear the shawl, and then I also talk about how you can make it smaller or bigger, and there's a blog post on that as well, so I'll link to all that below this video. I also released a new pattern, Valletta, this one, there's a knit along in my Love of Lace Knitting Facebook group. If you haven't joined yet and you want to join the Love of Lace Knitting Facebook group, please answer the 3 questions we ask you. You don't have to write an essay. You don't have to give us your life story, although I must admit I quite enjoy reading it when people do, but we just need to know that you're a knitter. So just answer the 3 questions just briefly and then we'll approve you. If you don't answer the 3 questions and it's not obvious that you're a knitter, then you will get rejected, I'm afraid. You can request to join again. You just got to answer the questions. I also released a new pattern last week. This is Albertine. Again, there's a separate video on this, which I posted on Friday, showing what this shawl looks like. It's quite big. This was originally published in the Knitter magazine, and this new version is actually bigger than the one that was in the Knitter. It's using a yarn that has 1200 meters per 100 grams, whereas the original one was 800 meters. It's got beads as well. Don't know if you can see that. So this pattern is out at the moment. So the Albertine pattern is 30% off until the 12th of August, using the coupon code Albertine30, and Albertine is capital letters. I'll put all those details below. There's also discounted kits on my website. So this shawl takes 1 cake of Shopple lace flower, and then it takes 4 bags of beads. It's got beads in the final lace section. So the kits include the yarn, the beads, and a PDF of the pattern. I'll put all those details below. The Valletta pattern, by the way, is 50% off until the middle of September, so I'll put the details for that below as well. So I'm going to actually talk about what I'm going to talk about first, and then I'm going to show you what's on my needles later, because there hasn't been a lot of change in what's on my needles. That's the only thing about doing this podcast. I feel like I need to get through things quicker. But I'll explain later why I haven't got through what I've done, why it's taken me so long. Anyway, I thought today I would talk about elitism in knitting and the fact that knitting can be a very expensive hobby. By the way, it is raining outside, so I don't know whether you can hear it, but it is raining outside. It started just before I came upstairs to record. It was really loud just now, so I hope it's not loud. I hope you can't hear it on camera. But right, let's talk about elitism in knitting and the cost of knitting as a hobby. And that's what knitting is. Knitting is a hobby. We don't knit these days. We don't knit because we have to provide clothing for ourselves. If you wanted a new sweater, it'd be a lot cheaper to go and buy it. Even a good quality sweater would probably be cheaper than knitting it yourself. Excuse me. Just gonna get a drink of water quickly. So we knit because we enjoy it. At least I hope we do. Some of us find it relaxing, and some of us find it helps us with various problems in our life. I loved reading your comments last week. Thank you to those of you who commented. I love reading your comments about why you knit. I shared why I knit, one of the reasons why I knit last week, and how I got back into knitting, and how it helped me with suffering from chronic pain, and how to cope with that, and how it ultimately provided me with a new career. So I shared some of that last week. So if you didn't watch last week's episode, do go and have a listen to it. And some of you shared your stories as well, how knitting has helped you, and I really enjoyed reading that. I think knitting, for most of us who knit these days, we knit because we enjoy it, because it provides us with some kind of social value, some kind of distraction, something to do that's maybe not on our phones or on our tablets or playing computer games or whatever. It makes us gives us something to do that will provide something. You know, you end up with a result. You know, I went through a period where I got slightly addicted to playing Tetris. That was when we first got a telly that you could play games on. Mid-90s, early noughties maybe. It's before I had, we had games on our phones anyway, before I got a phone, I think. I got really into playing Tetris on the telly, and I would sit in the evening and I could play it for hours, and I would stay up late and play it. And then you kind of stop and you think, I wasted like 2 hours playing this stupid game. If I knit for 2 hours, I have something to show for it. May not be very much, but I'll have something to show for it. So that's one of the great things about knitting, I think. And the fact that we get something to wear at the end of it is really a bonus. Although we can get something to wear to give to somebody we like is really a bonus. So most of us knit because we enjoy it. But yarn can be expensive. I like luxury yarn. I'm a bit of a yarn snob. I totally admit that. If I could afford it, I would probably only knit with hand-dyed yarn. Cashmere, silk, Kiviot for the rest of my life, but I can't afford that. There's been a lot of discussion on social media lately about inclusivity in knitting, and that means from a race point of view, from a financial point of view, from a size point of view, and I didn't realise that some people felt excluded from the knitting community because of their racial background or their ethnic background. I didn't realise that as a white person. That had never dawned on me, and I felt really bad when I realised that. And I may talk about that in a future episode. But there are also people who feel excluded because of for financial reasons. They just can't afford to buy expensive yarn. And they may go to a knitting group, or they may follow people online, or be in a Facebook group where everyone seems to be knitting with expensive yarn, and they feel, I can't afford that. I don't know how I can contribute. How can I be part of that group if I can't afford this hand-dyed yarn? In the last few years, I've seen social media influencers, designers with huge social media followings, using 5 to 6 skeins of hand-dyed yarn for a shawl. And they haven't even used the whole skein, so they suggest, set of 6 skeins for a shawl, and then they mainly only use a third to half of each skein. I mean, okay, you can use of leftovers for that kind of thing, but a lot of people feel pressured to buy things that maybe they can't afford. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can knit on a budget, and a little bit about how to substitute yarn, so my top tips. So I design for a lot of magazines. I've been designing for magazines for over 10 years now, probably about 12 years. And when I first started designing for magazines, I used to buy yarns in the local yarn shop, and then I would knit a swatch and come up with do my sketch and everything. And then I would always suggest the yarn for the magazine that I wanted to knit with. I viewed that as an opportunity for me to nip at the yarns that I couldn't afford to buy. So my favorite sweater for a yarn my favorite yarn for a sweater project, for example, used to be Monos del Uruguay silk blend, and I would suggest that for as often as I could get away with. And some magazines would let me knit in the yarn I wanted, and sometimes they would say, you've got to choose a budget option this time. You know, you've done the last two in a nice yarn, now you've got to choose a budget option. And I must admit, I used to get a bit disappointed because I wanted the expensive yarn that I couldn't afford to buy otherwise. But it also made me realise that there are actually budget options that are quite nice to knit with. There are companies producing yarn that isn't expensive to knit with. Having said that, I want to say before I go too much further about expensive and what's budget friendly and what's expensive is different to different people. So for some people, budget friendly, some hand-dyed yarn might be budget friendly. For some people, I'm just trying to think of some of the cheaper yarn companies in the UK, maybe Stylecraft, I can't think of anything, King Cole, things like that. For some people, that's expensive. Some people find that's expensive. So, you know, what's expensive and what's cheap is relative. So if you think what I'm suggesting as cheap, if you think, well, that's expensive, then, you know, it's all relative. It all depends on what circumstances you have, what other pressures you have on your finances, and that kind of thing. So I'm not I want to just make it clear that if I'm saying that talking about something as cheap or a budget friendly option, I know that for some people that can still be too expensive, and I understand that. You know, I'm sure most of us would like to knit with Kiviot. Most of us can't afford to knit with Kiviot. I've done Kiviot, by the way, if you're not aware, is a very luxurious fibre from the, I think it's the Arctic musk ox in Alaska. I had a pleasure once, quite a few years ago, of meeting a couple who from Alaska who actually produce Kiviot, and the lady had I think it was like a waistcoat knitted in 100% pure Kiviot. You know, it's one thing when you own the company, you're not paying retail price for that yarn. She was also really tiny. Now, I could not afford to knit something in Kiviot to fit me. I'm bigger and I would have to pay retail price. All I managed to afford was I think it was like a 30-gram skein of lace-thread yarn for a little tiny cow. That was all I could afford. So I bought what I could afford, and I designed and knitted a little tiny cow, and I treasured it because it was the most luxurious yarn I've ever knitted with. But I also couldn't afford to go out and buy a commercial sweater made from Kiviot. I don't think you can actually buy it here in the UK, but I'm sure if I went to Alaska you probably can, but there's no way I could afford to buy that. So you've got to kind of compare like with like as well. So if the yarn suggests a luxurious hand-dyed yarn, how can you get around that? What can you use instead? I use a lot of Schoppel yarns. So Schoppel is a German yarn company, and it is one of the yarns that I sell in my online shop. I like their yarns because they're very colourful, and I think they're fun to knit with, and they are a bit more affordable. So 100 grams is about 12 to 13 pounds. And a lot of my shawls would take 1 or 2 balls. So you're talking sort of 12 to 25 pounds for a shawl. Now, this shawl here, for example, took 2 balls, and I think that's 12.50, so that's 25 pounds for this shawl, plus the pattern, which is 4 pounds. So to me, that's not expensive. The amount of hours I got out of knitting this, that's not expensive. Even if I was going to go out and buy a scarf, I would probably pay more than that anyway. So for me, that's not expensive. To some people, that might still be expensive. So what do you look at if you need to substitute a yarn? Well, do shop around, look out for sales. I'm a little bit reluctant to say, you know, immediately go and look on eBay or look on the big, I'm not going to mention names, but the big websites that do very discounted yarns, because I think especially those big websites with very discounted yarns sometimes hurt yarn shops. So I'm a little bit reluctant to sort of recommend that, but sometimes you do need to shop around, and you may want to see if there's a sale going anywhere. I've just had a big de-stash. There's still a bit of yarn and fibre left on my website. So keep an eye out for things like de-stashes. A lot of people de-stash on Ravelry. Then you might be able to get some hand-dyed yarn that you wouldn't otherwise afford. I sold some beautiful hand-dyed yarn in my de-stash for very, very little. And there are still some really nice yarns left there. So do check out my website. And check out your local yarn shop and see if they do like a loyalty scheme. Do they give discounts? One of the yarn shops I teach at have a loyalty scheme. That's Spinner Yarn in Bovey Tracy in Devon. They have a loyalty scheme where if you, once you spent a certain amount, you keep your receipts, and then you get, I think it's 10% off. And I don't think there's like a limit that you have to spend. So I can't remember the full details, but say you have to spend £100 before you get the loyalty card. I don't think that that's time limited. I think you can do that over a few months or over a few years, from what I understand. And if you do a workshop there, if you come on a workshop, you actually get 15% off if you have a loyalty card. So everyone who attends a workshop there gets a voucher for 10% off. If you have a loyalty card, you get 15% off. And their voucher is not just valid for that day, it's valid for a month, I think. Apologies if I quoted any of this wrong, but I think I'm right. So if you are going on a workshop where you know that they're going to offer you a discount, either on the day or on, after the workshop, then you can think, well, I want to buy yarn for a sweater. They're going to give me 10% off or 15% off. Let's see if I can try and save up enough money to actually buy it with that discount. Because it would save you a substantial amount of money on, say, a sweater amount. Whereas if you're just buying a sock skein of sock yarn, maybe you only just get a 50p off. But if you're buying a sweater's worth of yarn, that could be a significant saving. So look out for things like that. And if you want to substitute the yarn, there are a few things that you need to think about. First, think about the fibre content. So look at what the garment or design is knitted in. If it's knitted in 100% merino, then cotton alpaca may not be suitable. If it's knitted in 100% cotton, then I should have written up some examples before, because I can't think of anything now. But look at the fibre content, try and go for something similar. It may be that you have a wool allergy, or you prefer yarns that are not made from animal fibre. So sometimes substituting, if a yarn uses merino, I would try and look for another wool or wool blend. But if you don't want to use animal fibres, that might not be possible. But look at the fibre content, try and choose something similar, or a yarn a fibre content that behaves in a similar way. So you may need to do a little bit of research. If you're not sure, so say the yarn is wool, but you don't want to knit with wool, or you sensitive to wool or anything like that, and you want to knit with cotton, knit a swatch and just see how it behaves. Cotton tends to stretch quite a bit, especially a thicker cotton, whereas wool tends to kind of keep its shape a bit better, I think. So it depends on what design it is. Sometimes substituting for a different fibre may work, sometimes it may not work. But look at the fibre content. Look at the meters of yards per 50 or 100 grams. If it's 50 gram balls or 100 gram balls, look at how many meters of yards per ball size that yarn has, and choose another yarn that has similar number of meters. Not all DK yarns are the same. Not all Aran weight yarns have the same number of meters. So do look at how many meters you will need per 50 or 100 grams to make sure you have enough, and choose a yarn that has a similar meterage or yardage. Look at the yarn construction. Is it a plied yarn? Is it a worsted spun yarn? Is it a woolen spun yarn? Is it a chain plied yarn? What kind of yarn is it? How is it spun? How is it plied? That could also be important, because that can change some of the characteristics of a yarn. One of the things that's taught me more about yarn construction and understand how yarn behaves more than anything else in all my years of knitting is actually learning how to spin. So I haven't actually spun for a few years now, and I do kind of miss it. And I'm thinking recently, because I've been going through all my yarn stash and fibre stash and getting rid of a lot, I did kind of think, oh, maybe I want to get back into spinning. But learning to spin taught me a lot about yarn construction and how yarn's made and how yarn behave, and it was really, really useful. So look at how the yarn is made, yarn construction. The tension on the ball band is just a guide. And I would say that the only thing that tension is really suitable for is when it comes to substituting yarn. So if you say the yarn has 20 stitches and 30 rows per 10 centimeter, if you can find a yarn that has similar tension on the ball band, then chances are it'll work. So it is important to, and obviously it's the same needle size. So if it's 20 stitches and 30 rows on 4mm needles, you need to look for a yarn that has the similar tension. But you always need to knit a swatch and check your own tension, especially if you're using a different yarn. Also knit a swatch to make sure that you like the fabric and that the fabric behaves in the way you want it to. If you're not sure about the yarn you want to use, buy one ball, knit a swatch, wash it, block it, carry it around, abuse it, stretch it, knit a bigger swatch, hang it up. One designer I read a book by quite a few years ago when I first started designing, she said that she always knitted a big swatch, like very big swatch, like 30-40 centimeters or something, and then she would hang it up and hang pegs from the bottom to kind of try and see how we would stretch, because gravity has an effect on things. Thinner yarns are usually better value than thicker yarns. So if you're looking for a yarn that has good value, look for a yarn that has more meters per ball size. So for example, if I buy an Aran weight yarn, chunky yarn, I haven't bought an Aran weight yarn for a long time, so I don't know what the average meterage is for an Aran weight yarn, but say I buy a yarn that has 50 meters per 50 grams compared to a yarn that has 200 meters per 50 grams. The thicker yarn, yes, I can knit it on thicker needles, so I'll need less yarn because the stitches are bigger, but it will still cost me a lot more than a thinner yarn. I knit a lot in 4-ply, which is the same as fingering weight yarns, and lace weight yarns, because of the fact that they give you so much better value for money. You get so many more meters. So the sweater that pink sweater, I think I might have shown it in episode 1. I haven't released the pattern yet. I haven't actually finished the pattern yet. It was one of the things I planned to do before my holiday started this week, and I forgot. Well, I just ran out of time to do it. But I knitted a sweater in Rowan Silky Lace, I think it's called. I think it's a silk and cotton blend. I can't remember, and I can't see a ball band. I'm sure I've got a ball band around on my desk somewhere, but I can't see it at the moment. But I'm big. I'm quite a big size, and I use 4 50-gram skeins. That's 200 grams. If I was going to knit a sweater in Aran weight, I would need a lot more than that, and it would cost me a lot more money. So use thinner yarns, especially if you're bigger. Thinner yarns are much better value for money. And they also take much longer to knit, which also makes them better value for money. Knitting stuff in chunky yarn and Aran weight yarn is bad value for money, because you'll finish it so much quicker. Knitting a sweater in lace weight yarn might seem like a daunting thing, especially if you're a bigger size, because it will take you a longer time. But hours of knitting, much better value for money. So that's something to think about as well. So those are my kind of main views on the cost of knitting and how you can try and knit on a budget. I would always say, my advice is always use the best materials that you can afford. So if you can afford to buy slightly more expensive yarn, then do it. If you can't afford to buy slightly more expensive yarn, then look for a good quality yarn for your budget. There are some really nice yarns out there that are slightly cheaper. King Cole do some nice ones. I'm not that familiar with Style Crafts. I don't know. Serda do some nice ones, I think. I haven't used Serda for a while either, actually. But there are some cheap yarns out there that you can use. It doesn't all have to be expensive. But shop around and take advantage of destashes and things like that. Right, so I'm going to show you what's on my needles this week. First, I'll show you, I've actually finished something. But it's only half of something, really. I finished one sock. So this is my Mud Punch socks. I do actually have a pair of socks I knitted years ago in this exact same colorway. When I ordered this colorway, which has actually been in my stash for at least 2.5 years, possibly 3.5 years, I didn't know that I already had this colorway, but I really like it, and the socks I already have in this colorway are getting a bit old, so that's fine. I'm just trying to straighten this up on my sock blockers a bit. So I have finished the first sock and I've cast on for the second sock. So this I'm knitting from my sock pattern Aventuras, which is Spanish for adventure, and it's a kind of choose your own adventure sock pattern. The sock pattern gives you the option of cuff down or toe up, 2 different toes, 2 different heels. Both heels are afterthought heels, so 2 different afterthought heels, 2 different toes, and 2 different stitch patterns. So that gives you 16 options in total, 16 different patterns from that one pattern. And I also do an online class as well for it. So this is knitted from the top down. I did 20 rounds of rib to start with, then I did an alternating rib for the rest of it, and I did a swirly heel. So you can see here how it's got like a swirly decrease pattern on the heel, and I also did a swirly toe. I think they are my favorite at the moment. So yeah, really like that. I got some of these stitch markers in various places. I tend to put these in from where I need to measure. So I put one in at the end of the rib. Probably didn't really need one there, to be quite honest, because it's fairly obvious where I needed to count the alternating rib pattern from. Then I put one in when I put the waist join in for the afterthought heel. So I put on the top of the foot because it's easier to count here. I actually, this alternating rib pattern is done in rounds of 5, and I actually managed to put in the, I put in the afterthought heel when I changed the stitch pattern here. So then I just had to count 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, etc. So it just makes it easier to count. And then when I picked up the stitches and started the afterthought heel, I put one in here as well, so I can count how many rounds I've done on the afterthought heel. So I like these sort of stitch marks a lot. I find them makes it easier to know where I am. So I finished that one. I think that was on Sunday morning, and then I cast on for another one. So done a little bit, but how much have I done? 25, 10, 15, 20, 25. So I've done 20 rounds of rib and then 25 rounds of the alternating rib, and I'm doing 60 rounds of the alternating rib in total. So I'm nearly halfway through the leg. So we're going to an event this week in North Cornwall called Creation Fest. It's a Christian festival, and we were there yesterday and this morning, and that's where I've mainly been knitting on that. My lace project is the same as last week, and I haven't actually done that much more on it. I think maybe it's grown a little bit, but not a lot, so I'm not going to talk much about that. If you're interested in that, go and look at last week's episode. This I'd hoped to finish, and I've got 1.5 round left. So that's this one. It's my poncho, colorwork poncho. I got 1.5 rounds left, but there are over 300 stitches per round, so it's just taking me a little bit of time. But I'm nearly finished. I probably would have finished this yesterday, but we were out all morning. We came back in the afternoon. I was really, really tired. I hadn't slept very well. So I was really, really tired in the afternoon. So I ended up going to bed for a little bit. And then we actually went out in the evening. I'll actually add some video clips at the end of this and photos at the end of this episode. But we went to a nearby town called Foy. Yesterday evening, my husband and my daughter went kayaking, and I took Alfie for a walk and did a bit of knitting, and we had a bit of fun. So I didn't get much knitting done yesterday when we were home. So means I've still got 1.5 rounds left to do on this. So next time you see me, this will be finished. I'm not going to release the pattern until September probably, but I can't wait to finish it because it's been on the needles for well over a year. So that's what's on my needles this week. I am waiting for some yarn to arrive for an urgent design. I think the deadline's like the end of August, and I got to get it back to the US, and the yarn still hasn't arrived, which is making me slightly worried now, which is why I've been resisting finished casting on anything else, and it's why I want to get this finished before this yarn arrives. So I'm going to try and finish this tonight. We've got dog training tonight, so I may not manage to do it. But we'll see, because it's about, what's the time? It's about 3:30 in the afternoon now. So once I finish this, I'm going to go downstairs and sit in it, and hopefully I might be able to finish it before dinner. If not tomorrow, but I can't wait. So next week I'll show you how that's finished. So just to finish off, I'm going to add some video clips to the end of this episode from our evening in 4 yesterday. We had a lovely time. Alfie had a little go on the kayak, and as you'll see from the video, he nearly fell in. So that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. I will be back with another episode next week, and hopefully another cast on, and hopefully a finished poncho. So oh, I've forgotten to draw the winner for these. So I've done a draw for the last 2 episodes for a copy of my book, Easy Lace Knits or Beaded Lace Knitting. I've had loads of comments. I've read them all. I haven't replied to them all yet, and I forgot to do the draw. So I'm going to do the draw before I post this episode, and I'll add the winner at the end of this episode, and then I'll be in contact with the winner as well to send them the prize. Okay, so I'll add it to the little credit thing at the end of this episode. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I love your feedback, so please give me any feedback. Love to hear what you think, what you'd like me to talk about, and also tell me what you're knitting at the moment. And I'll be back next week. Have a lovely week.